I am. Been a while.
I know. How do we usually start these things? You might have noticed that we took a little bit of a break. We didn't really mean to. It was kind of accidental.
Mhm.
Well, it was summer. It's hard to do anything in the summer because we just wanted to be out in the sunshine.
Mhm.
And then it was fall.
Yep. And,
Then it was Christmas, like the holidays. But now it's the winter and we're stuck inside. So we figure, let's get back to our podcast maybe.
mhm. Let's dive right back in.
We used to feel a lot of guilt whenever we messed up or had to take a break like this, but this time we're kind of thinking of our podcast more as a creative practice. And it's nice to know that even if we take some time away to focus on other things, it's just waiting for us so we can come back to it when we want to, because ultimately we do it because we enjoy it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's nice to know we can come back when we feel ready to share new thoughts and we feel excited and really like we want to spend time sharing our thoughts in this way.
Exactly. We've controlled the chaos into a conversation that's ready for everybody to hear.
Yeah.
I will say that with the podcast and when you're taking a break from any kind of creative practice, it is hard to get back into it once you take some time away, isn't it?
Oh my
Just
gosh. Yeah. Even just
there's
setting up the
like
mics here, we're a little bit like, what are we
exactly. We
doing?
forget how to do it. We forget how to transition back into it. And it's the same. I swear every 6 months I forget how to paint. Like
Mm,
I don't know how to do this anymore if I take a little break from it or a long break.
for sure.
I think that some of the impacts that taking breaks can have on inspiration, sometimes it feels like when we take some time away, for example, with this podcast, ideas can build up. And then when we come back, it's like, oh, we have so many things that we want to make and talk about, and everything just feels like a dam that's ready to burst.
Mhm.
But sometimes you come back and everything is gone.
Yeah, if you haven't worked that muscle, you haven't thought about these topics in a while, it can be hard to get back in the swing of it. Or like you
Mhm.
say, you have all these ideas that, are percolating in your mind that you're excited to dive right into.
There are some things that can make returning after a break easier, though. And we're playing around with some ways to do this in our own studios. We might have talked about this before, but the idea of a studio log is something that we're taking pretty seriously in 2024. What is a studio log, Natalie?
Well, for us, it is a series of ways to track your progress, write down information, basically a really great resource for tracking your inspiration and keeping your ideas in one spot or maybe a few spots. It's just right there and ready for you to write down, doodle, get the information out of your head and into a spot in order for you to create after that.
Hmm. And sometimes we're writing down things that feel insignificant in the moment, like tiny little details or marks. But then when we come back a day, a week, a month later, we wouldn't even remember doing those things. And they're the things that can help us step back in to what we were doing before.
Mhm.
So in November, Natalie and I both created new little studio log journals. I'm not super happy with the sketchbook that I chose. It was a cheap one from the dollar store. I didn't know how committed I was gonna be to the idea, if I was gonna actually use it. I didn't wanna buy a fancy sketchbook to add to my fancy sketchbook pile that I don't use.
We all have that pile.
Yeah. But now that I'm into it, I have some regrets. My
Mm.
paper is too thin. It doesn't really hold any wet media, which I didn't think I was gonna be doing wet media in here, but I find if I have something on the brush, I'll just do a blob and then it
Mhm.
bleeds through the next page, like, I have regrets. How
Hmm.
what about you?
I think I mostly feel regretful about not returning to it as much as I should. I feel like
Mm,
leaving it in this room
mm.
versus having it more accessible when you're living your day to day life was not the right move. You
That's a
know,
good point. A couple of times I have closed it and put it on a shelf, and I'm like, "Ooh, that's a bad move."
yeah, you just kind of forget about it.
Yeah, it has to stay open on my desk all the time, so it's like takes up room, otherwise I wasn't using it, I completely agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Okay, so we're trying out this new studio journal system. Shall I talk them through what we're trying out. And we're new to this system. We may change it in a couple months. We'll give you an update. But as of right now, this is what we're trying out.
Mhm.
Okay. So, yeah, the studio journal, like a big sketchbook. What size is it? 8.5 by 11 ish, 9 by 12
I
ish.
think maybe 9 by 12.
Yeah, something big
Mhm.
that you could paste whole pieces of paper into it, take notes on it. It takes up space, like we said, so you can't forget about it as easily. It's like an external hard drive, something that you can put your brain into as you're working through your studio time. And the main goal we wanted for this book was to track progress. So, thinking of it kind of like a bullet journal for artists. Instead of a daily log, it's like a studio log at the top. You put the date, and then you just make little insignificant notes, marks, color swatches to yourself to record as you're doing it or at the end, but before you leave, so that when you come back next time, you think, oh, I glued that thing on. Okay, cool. Maybe the evidence is right in front of you, but maybe you wouldn't remember it if you came back 6 months later and you had to shuffle your tables around or your space is multi purpose or all sorts of things like that. I'm a big mind map maker, so I've also used a couple pages for mind maps, which has been fun. Is there anything else that you've used it for, Natalie, or you'd like to use it for?
Well, we also included some, more long-term goal planning. So we talked a little bit about, thinking 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, a year out, or even beyond that into 5 or 10 years, and kind of thinking long term about what it means to be creative and what are your goals long term in order to be able to make step by step progress towards
Mhm,
something. So that's been really interesting to consider, and having it written down and being able to refer to it pretty easily is really nice. I feel like we talk about these things with people, or maybe you've made a note on your computer, but you don't see it on the regular.
mhm.
So, yeah, having it in these studio log books has been really nice.
And it will be fun to refer back to it. Maybe it won't be fun if the things aren't achieved, but that's also
True.
a lesson in itself, you know? Maybe
Mhm.
your goals have changed, and that's okay too.
Yeah.
But just to think, what was I thinking, 6 months ago or a year ago at the end
Mhm.
of this? Okay, so we got our big book, our studio journal. I also love a little book. We both are little book connoisseurs. We have different functions for our little books. We use them a bit differently, but they're part of our practice on and off. Sometimes I use it a lot, sometimes I don't use it for 6 months. And I find it again and I'm like, "Ooh, here's my little book. I'm gonna write a little idea in my little book." But with the idea of the studio journal, I think that the little book was acting as a studio journal actually
Yeah.
before this, especially when we were in school and we were moving around a lot and our studio spaces were changing, or this is the first time I've had a home studio. So I felt like my little book was coming with me everywhere. And it still kind of does, but it was trying to do what the studio journal is doing for me now, taking track of everything. Whereas these days, I more so use my little book. If I'm going to a museum, I'll bring it. Or if I'm reading an art book, but I'm not in my studio, I'll take a few notes. Or if I come to visit you, I bring my little book and we'll do some doodles and some sketches and things like that together.
Mhm.
Basically, all the little out of studio art, not art, notes, doodles, ideas. It's like a catch all.
I think it's important to have a spot that's not your phone. Your phone
Yeah.
serves a purpose for,
Hmm. Hmm.
its own things, but being able to put pen to paper, pencil to paper, I think is really important, especially if you're wanting to just do a quick little doodle. Like, that's hard to do on your phone
Oh,
in
yeah.
the same way. So, yeah, a little book is great for that.
Mhm. It's about phone size too, so it fits everywhere your phone fits. We like little books, like, I know some people like a half page, but we like the babies because they're phone size. They can go in the pocket or a little sling bag or something like that.
Mhm.
But that is why going to a big studio journal and having it live in my studio has felt like a bit of a treat because I'm used to working in all the little books.
Mhm. Yeah.
One thing I do wish I was doing differently, and if I'd set this up again, because this is all trial, we're just trying out this new studio journal system for the first time. I think I would lean more heavily into the bullet journal concept and do a little bit more of a heavy duty index system. I
Mm.
have a little index in the front of my studio journal. I don't think I have an index in my little book, which is just a travesty,
There's
but
always
it's
the
still
next little book.
it's gonna go in the next little book, yeah, but It feels so small that I can just flip through it easily, although I can't find stuff that easily, mostly because of my handwriting. But if I was to set this up again, or maybe I could still fix it somehow, I don't know. It's doing an index system where I could write down an idea or part of a process for a project or a note or something in my studio journal or my little book, and my index would refer to them both. I don't know. Maybe that's just overkill. I don't, I don't know if I would actually keep it up, but in an ideal system, wouldn't that be lovely so that they could be like part of each other?
Yeah, I think when you're working through a big project, ideas will come to you wherever you are. So being able to have the option to write down notes or ideas in one place, but be able to remember where they are is super key when you're out and about, when you're a
Mhm.
busy person.
When you're living that life. You mentioned the phone, and I do agree. That's the part of the joy of a little book is to have something outside of your phone. But sometimes you don't have your little book. Many times, a lot of the time, yeah, I don't have my little book. A lot of my ideas will come to me in the middle of the night, or my thoughts that seem like great ideas, and I have to write them down in the moment. In the morning, sometimes they're good, sometimes they're not so much. So I do think that part of this system, an important part, is having some sort of on your phone place where you know you put your ideas or thoughts down so that if you did want to transfer any of them into your studio journal or act on them, you know where they are. I've tried every note taking app under the sun. Maybe not all of them. If you have a recommendation, I'd love to try another one. But the one that has stayed with me through every device is just the free Apple Notes app
Mhm.
because it's just always there. It never gets taken from me and it just exists. So that's where I write my ideas down. I've tried a bunch of other ones, but the ideas just get lost in the shuffle and it feels like fail safe to have something simple, open up a note, put the idea in, close it.
Absolutely. It's also fun to go back through them.
Mhm.
Wow.
Oh my gosh.
Some
Yep.
things you write down, you're like, "Wow, this is gold," and then, yeah, you just leave it, and then years later, you're like, "Wow, no,
I
that."
know, everything looks like poetry when it's in the little Apple Notes notebook, but then it's like, "Oh, man, this is basically just a grocery list." Okay, so we got studio journal, we got little book, we got some kind of phone system that you know you can rely on. I also love to have a little bonus book in the studio. This is probably overkill, and sometimes I don't even use it. Sometimes I just use scrap paper if I have scrap paper to use up. Just a book where I can make any mess or marks or, like, try out just a scribble of a tool or see if my pencil's working or, anything like that. Just basically a scratch pad, a little blank book where I can not worry about it and not have to keep a bunch of test papers at the ready when I'm in the middle of something.
Mhm. It's a great idea.
I kinda wish we had a studio journal for our last podcast episode
Hmm.
because this would probably feel easier. Maybe we should do a studio journal page for today.
Yeah.
I'll turn to a blank page.
Okay. Yeah, there's no reason why we can't translate these ideas that we're applying to our own practices to this project we do together.
I think that I get caught up in a lot of productivity systems that promise to fix your whole life. Like,
Mm.
for example, a bullet journal where you keep track of everything. So I've tried to include a studio idea note-taking system into something like that,
Right.
and it always feels better to me personally when it's separate. I don't know why I don't like to have them live together. I like to have it in separate books. I don't like it next to my grocery lists or all of the other
Yeah.
things I have to do.
I think that makes sense though. There's all the ways things to do in life, right? So
Mhm,
having all of your to-dos piling up or your lists, your ideas, like in all
mhm,
aspects feels almost overwhelming. Like I know that I wouldn't carry on with that for sure because it feels overwhelming when it's all together, I think.
mhm. But because of that, when I haven't incorporated it into my various I'm gonna organize my life tirades that I go on, I don't take it as seriously
Mm.
outside of it. I don't have a serious productivity practice to record and, build up proof of my progress over time in my studio, like I do to keep track of, the things that feel more urgent in life, like appointments and stuff like that.
Yeah. I guess there's time and a place for putting the same type of urgency on your creative practice as going to the doctor and, doing the life things that are really important. for like our general well-being and, creative outlet.
This can be part of that.
Mhm.
I agree. And I think that the fact that I leave it sometimes, it isn't a daily task. For example, sometimes, I have a daily studio practice when I can get into it, and that's great. That's aspirational for myself. But the fact that I do leave it alone if I don't have a project on the go means that it's hard to keep up any of these systems. But that's when the systems become even more important because I can't return to it if I don't have any evidence of what I was working on. Sometimes when I'm doing these studio journals, I try to think of myself as like a field explorer and I'm out trying to
Mhm.
discover a new species of bird or something. And I'm recording all the things like weather and all the things that might feel insignificant. But in retrospect, after you've made the discovery, that's all important information.
Yeah, I love that.
So in 2024, we're trying to keep studio journals,
Mhm.
basically. We're trying to take our studio time a little bit more seriously in terms of recording everything that's happening inside of that time.
Yeah. I think we've talked a little bit about on-ramps before in a previous
Yeah.
and it feels very true, and it's a good step towards on-ramps every time we're in the studio, every time we're making. It's just a little bit
Mhm.
easier to get started.
Yeah. And it also feels like even in 10 minutes, if you've made a studio journal log, you've done something. It's the proof of your progress building up in a physical way that you can see accumulating over time. Like the pages are filling up. You can see it happening, especially when a lot of the work that you do is exploratory or idea building or practice or whatever stage you're at in a project. There are some stages that you can see the work piling up in a way that's really satisfying. And then there's other stages where it feels like you're doing nothing, even if you're spending a lot of time thinking or exploring. All that thinking and exploring suddenly feels like progress that's really physical and right in your face.
Absolutely. I think the other part too is the observations you make oftentimes don't make its way onto paper into words that you can read later. So when you've come to the end of a project, it's hard to think about what you were thinking or the ideas that were in your mind at that time in the midst
Mhm,
of making the work. So having all of this written log work is great to refer to at the end of the
mhm,
project as well.
mhm. And a lot of artists are really good at this, but I'm personally not, and I'm trying to be better. But writing down techniques, materials, paint color recipes, the types of glue that I'm using. If you're asking yourself, well, what would I even put in a studio log? Like I have asked myself over and over as I've been doing it, I just think, okay, well, what's the most simple thing that can record about what I have in my hand right now or what I just did? Sometimes as simple as used, you know, neutral pH glue on panel. That's enough information. Like that is something that tells you about what you were doing at that time. I know that a lot of people who are in the bullet journal world use their bullet journals for everything like task management, project management, instead of using digital systems. Like some people do calendar layouts and things like that. That's not how I'm thinking of this, really. I mean, if that works for you, all the power to you, but I think still use your current systems for everything else, even studio related tasks and like project deadlines and things. My studio journal doesn't have urgent information in it.
Mm.
It's all exploratory. If I have a deadline, it's still going to go in Google Cal on my phone because I don't want to have a feeling of, oh, I need to check it because I'm forgetting something. It's not a planner, it's just blank paper. A sketchbook with blank paper in it. That's not an agenda for 2024 that we're starting, although I do love a good planner. Setting up a planner is so fun at the beginning of the year. And this felt fun too, but it's a different system. I think the idea is that you could grab any sketchbook, preferably a big one for your studio log, and just open a new page, write studio log and the date at the top of it, and just start taking notes on what you're doing. And then you have a studio log. You have a studio journal started.
I love that it's that simple and, you know, not fancy and not overwhelming. It can be as simple as what you've just described.
So try it. We'll keep you updated on how it works for us, especially the way that the 4 books are coming together. I'm curious to see how that's gonna work for me. That's potential,
Yeah, maybe we'll put in our calendar to do an update in like 3 months.
maybe 6.
Thanks. 6 months, okay. You heard it here first.
But ultimately, we're trying to just make it easier for us to have our studio practice exist no matter how busy life gets. So if we need to take another 6 months break from something, then we still have a record of where our minds were at when we were in it. And it makes taking breaks that much easier and less stressful. And we can actually take the breaks and feel good about it, not that you're feeling your ideas slipping through your fingers because they're already safely recorded.
Absolutely. And that little sketchbook that we keep referring to is a great one to keep when you're not making also. Keep it in
Mhm.
your book bag, you keep it in your purse, keep making notes and writing those ideas down, even if you're not in your studio making work.
Yeah, we've used our little sketchbooks for things that aren't super studio related. If we had a meeting, we'll take meeting notes. If we go for a walk and we see a weird leaf, we might doodle it. Like it doesn't have to be, the ins and outs of your project practice all the time. It's just a book to capture anything that comes to mind. All your little curiosities. That's the whole point.
Yep.
Okay. Well, it's 2024. We're back with a new podcast episode. We're excited to dive back into this project.
Mhm.
Now we got to write it down in our studio log.
Yep, keep us accountable.
Uh-huh, exactly. So if you have a studio log or some kind of journal practice, we'd love to hear about it.
Mm,
Send us pics, send us the pages, how you have it set up. We love to see it. And maybe we'll learn something from you. Probably will.
absolutely. Please share. All right, we'll talk to you all soon.
Bye.
Bye.